mentioned that the army is trying to get things back to normal as far as possible. All the roads around the 6th of October bridge, all the various flyovers are busy with traffic again. It's just this one road in the square itself that's blocked. Now, apparently, the army has been trying to do this by persuasion, but the demonstrators don't appear to be persuaded or reassured at all. In fact, the last I saw, they were forming a human chain, standing hand in hand across the road, the demonstrators, making it quite clear that they don't want to take down the barricades. Now, it may be that the argument of the army is that, well, we provided security for your so-called day of departure on Friday. Obviously, no one did depart, and we can take responsibility for security from now on. But bearing in mind that this was the front line of those very violent clashes, and it appears that the demonstrators only trust themselves to protect themselves on this particular front.
No. Thanks very much indeed. And I can update you on the bank situation, because there's been a statement from the Egyptian Central Bank's deputy governor about the fact that the banks have been closed for security reasons. He says an earlier report that they would reopen at 8:30 Egyptian time on Sunday is incorrect. They won't reopen at 8:30 Egyptian time on Sunday. They will reopen at 10 a.m. 10 a.m. and they will close at 1:30 p.m. The stock exchange, well, that's not going to reopen on Monday. Apparently, the authorities there saying what's going to happen is they will let everybody know 48 hours beforehand. We were mentioning that Hillary Clinton has warned of what she's described as a perfect storm in the Middle East if reforms aren't implemented. Well, she's been joined by Germany's Chancellor Angela Merkel, who says change in Egypt must be, quotes, peaceful and orderly.
Es ist absolut notwendig.
It is of vital importance to uphold the freedoms that we consider universal, like freedom of press, freedom of opinion, freedom of independent journalism, not only in Europe or America, but also in Egypt. Yesterday was relatively peaceful, and we hope it was a sign and will continue. There will be a change in Egypt, but it must be formed in a way that it will be peaceful and sensible.
On Egypt, our position should be clear. We want to see the transition to a more broadly based government with the proper building blocks of a free and democratic society. I simply don't accept that there is somehow a dead-end choice between a security state on the one hand and an Islamist one on the other. But let us not fool ourselves. These are just contributory factors. Even if we sorted out all of the problems that I've mentioned, there would still be this terrorism. And I believe the root lies in the existence of this extremist ideology. And I would argue an important reason so many young Muslims are drawn to it comes down to a question of identity.
Let's bring in Tim Friend, who's at that conference. It is a security conference, Tim, so do you get the impression that, by and large, most of these Western leaders are pretty worried that security in the region of the Middle East would be adversely affected from their point of view if Mubarak goes?
Yeah, I think that's one of their main concerns, although it has to be said these are all people who, until a week ago, were quite happy to, or just over a week ago, quite happy to do business with President Mubarak. And the criticism is that perhaps they should have spotted the discontent earlier. The speech that has grabbed the headlines here is the one by Hillary Clinton. She went on to say that other leaders in the region might think they can resist change. They won't be able to. She said, and if this week has proved anything, it's that those who close the door on change will reap a whirlwind. Well, I think really she was laying down a marker. This was quite a significant speech expressed in fairly assertive terms. But the difficulty they've all got here, all the world leaders, there's Ban Ki-moon, the UN Secretary General, there's the European Union foreign policy boss, Catherine Ashton, the Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov. The real difficulty they've all got is who fills that vacuum that David Cameron, the British Premier, was alluding to in that clip from his speech that you've just played. They've got a bit of an issue, I think, on that front.
Mrs. Clinton has said the same thing before. In fact, I was with her at a conference here in Doha about 3 weeks ago in which she pointed at a number of Arab leaders in the room and said, we can tell countries what we think, but we cannot tell them what they should do. You have to bring in change. Now, it's others who appear to be catching up with that, but whether the Arab leaders are listening is a different matter.
Well, you're quite right, and she recalled that speech she made in Doha and said that this was her main message. And of course, we do hear that President Obama had reinforced his Secretary of State's words with President Mubarak, but clearly it wasn't getting through. Now, whether or not the leaders here, that is, can seize this moment and use it as a way of demonstrating fairly vividly what can happen if you ignore perhaps their words of advice from Washington remains to be seen. Many countries in that region are in the balance at the moment, and I think there is concern here that, for instance, there's a quartet meeting of Middle East mediators taking place on the sidelines. This was something else that was planned before the events in Egypt, but of course that's taken on an added urgency because, of course, what happens in Egypt, as we all know, can and would have a direct effect on those stalled Middle East peace talks. So there's a lot of dynamics going on here, and interesting to hear Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor, talking about it all, because of course she's a former East German resident who witnessed change herself in Europe when the Berlin Wall came down, and some seasoned observers here have even gone as far as saying perhaps we're seeing a Berlin Wall moment in parts of the Middle East.
And she will be well aware, Tim, won't she, that although democracy now has come to large parts of Eastern Europe, it was not without its problems. Tim, thank you very much. Tim Friend in Munich. The gas supply is being disrupted after an explosion on a pipeline in Egypt. Company officials say the blast was caused by a leak and that it was not, as earlier had been reported, attacked. The damaged pipeline supplies gas to both Israel and Jordan. Let's talk to Al Jazeera's Nisrin Al-Shamaili, who's in the Jordanian capital, Amman. What are they saying now?
Well, David, regardless of the cause, whether it's the leak in the pipeline or an act of sabotage, it really does strain the Jordanian economy at a very unnecessary time. The managing director of the Jordanian National Electricity Company has told me that now all power plants in Jordan are having to operate on burning fuel oil and diesel in order to provide the country with electricity due to the suspension of supplies of gas to Jordan as a result of the explosion. Now, this is likely to cost Jordan around $4 million a day at a time when the government is trying to implement economic reforms and political reforms. Now, the Egyptian authorities have promised the Jordanians to repair this pipeline within a week. Officials here are telling us that the situation is manageable, but indeed they only have about reserves of diesel and fuel oil for around 3 weeks. So the situation and the pipeline has to be fixed very soon. And this comes in light of demands from the people that the government introduce economic reforms in order to reduce the economic hardships of the citizens. And at the same time, the government has also introduced a package of cuts worth $550 million US, and those include cuts on the prices of fuel derivatives and some staple products. And now the officials are saying that they will have to bear the brunt of any increase in the prices of oil or gas as a result of this suspension, because they had promised the Jordanians that there will be no increases or fluctuation in the prices of fuel derivatives from now until the end of March, David.
Nisrin Al-Shamaili, thank you very much from the Jordanian capital, Amman. Not just Jordan that's affected. Israel imports 40% of its natural gas from Egypt. It's a highly lucrative deal for Egypt. Brought $300 million last year alone. The export agreement's expected to treble in value in the next 5 years. Worries for Israel that a future Egyptian regime will call into question the supply deal. The stakes could be even higher for Jordan. Egypt supplies all of Jordan's gas needs. Let's go to London, talk to Samuel Chisuk, Senior Middle East Energy Analyst at IHS Energy. Samuel, apologies if I pronounced your surname wrong. I gave it my best shot, but I want to hear your expertise on this. Why, first of all, does Jordan get all of its gas from Egypt? That makes it a hostage to fortune.
Well, indeed. I mean, Jordan is quite a recent importer, however. It only happened in the last few years. They could stitch together a deal. They don't have any gas themselves, any gas reserves that are being produced sort of in any